Hello, welcome to the second part of this chapter. Here we talk about the institution of the World Trade Organization, or the WTO. The WTO is an international body that essentially adjudicates over, it doesn't set, it adjudicates over, and it is a policeman, if you like, to look at the global rules of international trade. It was established in 1995, and it was the successor of the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, or was commonly known as the GATT, which was an interim agreement, supposedly, when countries decided that they wanted to have freer world trade in 1947. And the way in which the GATT worked was that they had rounds of negotiations. There was no real headquarters for the GATT. The GATT was basically an intergovernmental committee that met when someone called them to meet. The leaders that called them often had the name of the round named after him or her. So you have the Dillon Round, named after the US Trade Representative at the time. You have the Kennedy Round, named after President John F. Kennedy. You have Tokyo Round. Sometimes it's the country where the round starts as well, the round of talks. It was established, so the WTO was established in 1995 as a kind of a permanent body for the GATT. But it was grown into, or it was set up as more than that. It really is the umbrella organization above the GATT. The GATT still exists, and as you'll see in a second, there are other agreements as well under the WTO. It has 161 member countries as of July 2015, and about 20 more countries are negotiating for membership. Membership has to be approved unanimously, so everyone has to agree on members joining. The WTO has certain principles, and these are to liberalize trade restrictions, move towards a world without trade restrictions, in other words, towards freer trade, non-discrimination between countries, and the rules that the WTO has is that the lowest tariff you have is the tariff on the so-called most favored nation. And whatever you get for your most favored nation, you also have to give to all other World Trade Organization members. Now, there is one exception to that, and it'll be covered in a later chapter. And there's no unfair encouragement for exports, so you're not supposed to encourage your own exports unfairly, in the sense of give them a subsidy, give the companies that export from your country subsidies. The activities of the WTO itself are first and foremost to host multilateral trade negotiations. Multilateral meaning negotiations that occur between more than two countries. So in the WTO case, you can tell that a multilateral trade negotiation is between all the members of the WTO simultaneously. So you're talking about over 160 countries negotiating. As I said, these negotiations go in rounds, and the last round was the Doha round. Unfortunately, the Doha round collapsed, and the developing countries who were in attendance walked out of the meeting. So the Doha round is suspended, and there is no sign that it's going to be resumed yet. At some point it may be, though. The WTO administers trade agreements and keeps track of all the trade agreements in the world. Most importantly, when it comes to the world trade kind of playing field, the WTO has a process for the settlement of any trade disputes between countries. It also does a periodic trade review of each member country. There are new WTO areas as well. Protection of intellectual property. That is an agreement on trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, or what's commonly known as TRIPS. A general agreement on trade in services, so instead of GATT, this is GATS. And with this, it extends the WTO GATT principles to trade in services. GATT only covered trade in goods. It also gives multilateral sector agreements, so in particular an agreement on trade in communication services, an agreement on trade in financial services. Probably the most controversial and yet most important aspect of the World Trade Organization, or the WTO, is the dispute settlement mechanism. On average, you get 32 cases per year, 17 per year since 2004 though, so less cases. And how it works is that it's usually more than one country governments can bring a complaint against another member country that it's not abiding by the global rules. And there's pre-negotiations. It's a pretty long process, but there's pre-negotiations. If those pre-negotiations don't resolve the issue, then a panel of experts is convened. They hear evidence and then they issue a ruling. There's a long appeals process which is possible, but usually the panel ruling is upheld in any case. Now, if the practices or policies of that country are found to violate the global rules, they really have a couple of choices. First of all, they can change their own behavior, which usually means enacting laws or dropping subsidies or something, some kind of government policy that's in violation of WTO rules, in which case they just conform to those rules, and that's that. Oftentimes what happens though is that the offending government refuses to change its rules, and then what happens is the complaining government can seek compensation. How that is usually done is by the complaining government imposing some tariffs, and that is their compensation. In America's case, America has its own Trade Act. So it's a Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. It gives the US President the power to negotiate to eliminate unfair trade practices of foreign governments. And the US itself can threaten to enact new barriers to imports into the US from the offending country. So this is another mechanism that the US has, which circumvents, or I should say is a kind of a national method to really avoid going to WTO if it wanted to. But the US tends to try and get support from other countries, and if it feels that a particular country is violating trade rules, it tends to try and get support from another country and then go to the WTO and launch a case against that specific country. And that is the end of the chapter. Thank you.